Hello, and welcome once again to our Wednesday Walkabout here at Jenkins Arboretum and Gardens. My name is Steve Wright. I'm the Director of Horticulture and Curator here at the Arboretum, and today I'd like to do something a little bit different. Last year at this time, most in our community were still picking up the pieces from a major storm that passed through our area. Called a derecho, the storm brought with it heavy rains and winds up to 85 miles per hour that damaged properties, that toppled trees, and left other trees so damaged that they also needed to be removed. Jenkins was certainly not spared from this storm, as we lost about 60 trees from our property. And the most significant damage to Jenkins' property was here around our pond. So I'm actually standing here just inside the pond fence. We're looking out over the cottonwood that used to stand here at the edge of the pond, and that's the tree that did topple over during the storm. And the root plate of this tree was actually about 10 feet up into the air, and we're going to show you some of the photographs from that. And the tree itself went almost across the pond. This was a fairly old specimen. This was planted here in about 1972, shortly after the pond was dug. And so it was certainly a major loss for us. But we decided that instead of taking the entire tree out, we would actually leave the trunk and some of the branches in there to provide habitat for various wildlife, namely the turtles, frogs, and herons that like to visit our pond. So you can see here that the base of the tree just has this big open cut, and we actually decided to plant a little shrub here to try to hide that cut. And it's not just any shrub. This is actually a very rare shrub. It's a native spirea called Spirea virginiana, and I believe this is federally endangered. This cottonwood was one of about 60 trees that we lost here at the Arboretum, and though it is dramatic because of its location, there were certainly other areas of the garden where we lost many trees, leaving us with almost a blank slate. And so what I'd like to do now is walk around and take a look at some of those other locations and talk about what used to be there and what we have done since the storm to try to repair the damage. The area that I'm standing in now was, before the storm, a grove of mature white pine trees. And every one of those pine trees either tipped out or was damaged by others that had tipped out to the point where they needed to be removed. Because most of this space was pine trees that then left us with a blank slate. And in some of the photographs, you're going to see kind of what that damage looked like with those trees tipped out. And then also what this area looked like after the cleanup efforts, but before we actually spread all of these wood chips out. It's pretty dramatic. What may be equally dramatic is to see how far we've come in a fairly short amount of time with our replanting efforts. So we're going to go and take a look at some of those replanting efforts, and I will tell you about what used to be in the spaces and what we have now. So standing in this space, you can see behind me what's left of the grove of pines. Basically, we lost the northern half of this grove of pines. And the pines were planted pretty early on as screening, so people in the garden couldn't see Devon State Road below. But as the years went on, there were also some ornamental plantings that were planted along the edge of this pine grove. And I'm actually standing right here on a Franklinia stump. This was one of the most beautiful Franklinias I had ever seen. It's just picture perfect in form and shape. Fall color was really spectacular. You can see in the photograph it was a beautiful specimen. And unfortunately, a pine tree fell right on this and sheared most of the branches off, and it wasn't salvageable. In addition, as I walk closer here, you're going to see a bunch of stumps sticking up out of the ground. And these are what's left of a very large grove of pawpaws. So this was our largest grove of pawpaws, probably about 30 feet tall. And it was also our most productive. This flowered very well and it fruited very well. And we would collect fruits off of these trees. We would eat them. We would collect the seeds. We would grow more pawpaws. Again, when the trees came down, sort of smashed this grove up to the point where it was looking pretty tattered. And we decided that after all of these losses, it actually made more sense for us to just go ahead and take this grove of pawpaws out the rest of the way and start with a clean slate. And so after the storms, there was nothing here except wood chips. So all of the chips from the pine trees and the cottonwood and a couple of other miscellaneous trees that had come down just got chipped up right here and put in big piles and then bulldozed down this bank. And we're actually really happy to have those chips because the soils in this location are fairly poor. They're pretty rocky, fairly poor quality, low nutrient soils. And so the addition of those wood chips as they break down are actually going to improve the soils in this area and then benefit all of the other plants that we have put in here. So you're going to notice along this front edge here, we have planted mostly herbaceous perennials, and these are all very low growing, very aggressive spreading perennials, because we wanted to just sort of fill up the space with things that were very pretty, also attracted bees and butterflies and so on. And then the next layer in are several shrub species, and these range in size from 3 to 5 feet. And then we go one layer back in and we have a few trees that we've added in here. So we have added a yellowwood, an American smoke bush, this is a black gum, and there's a tilia or an American basswood kind of behind me. And so we are replacing the trees that are here. We know that it's going to take a while for them to fill in, but we're pretty happy with the selection of plants that we have here and are pretty excited to see what this space is going to look like in the years to come. So arborist work is never easy at Jenkins Arboretum for a variety of reasons, and this storm certainly proved to be challenging. In order to get some of these trees down and to get the tree out of the pond, a lot of large equipment had to be brought in, and there was no real access to these locations, and so it was inevitable that we would have to drive through some of the areas of the garden that had been planted. So in order to get back to these locations, we had to lay mats down through our wildflower beds, and then all of this heavy equipment would drive across the mats and get out to the locations. So a week of driving on these mats with heavy equipment actually took its toll, and we are now in the process of restoring some of these areas that got matted down, and we're going to be replanting them this year. So here I am now standing above the pond, and though we had a lot fewer losses above the pond, the combination of the couple of losses that we had and some removals have really transformed this landscape pretty dramatically as well. And I think the landscape actually has improved since the storms because of all of the losses and because we now have some pretty amazing views looking across this landscape.